never thought I'd be here alone. Hospitals had always made me uneasy. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the relentless beeping of machines, the cold, impersonal hum of fluorescent lights overhead. But this room, the one I was in now, wasn't just another hospital room. It was supposed to be the place where my life changed forever, where David would hold my hand and we would welcome our child together. That was the plan. But plans don't mean much when reality has its own agenda. Pain surged through my body, sharp and merciless, gripping me like an iron fist. I sucked in a breath, my fingers clutching the edge of the hospital bed as the contraction peaked, then slowly ebbed away, leaving me panting, exhausted. The nurse standing beside me, her name was Marla, I think, offered me a kind smile, the kind of smile laced with quiet pity. "Do you want me to call him again?" she asked gently. But I just shook my head. I didn't want to hear his voicemail. For the third time. David had promised he'd be here. He had kissed my forehead that morning, his hands warm against my face, and told me he'd meet me at the hospital as soon as he wrapped up some last-minute work. I had believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the father of my child, the person I had built a life with. But as the hours passed, my hope shrank, shriveled, until it was nothing but a hollow ache. I kept telling myself he was just stuck in traffic, that his phone had died, that he was rushing through the hospital halls at this very moment, desperately trying to find my room. But those excuses rang false, even in my own mind. I gritted my teeth as another contraction ripped through me, a deep, twisting pain that stole my breath. I wanted David's hand in mine. I wanted his voice telling me I could do this. But there was nothing. Just silence. I turned my head toward the window, trying to focus on something other than the tightening in my abdomen. The city stretched beyond the glass, lights flickering against the dark sky. I wondered if David was out there somewhere, caught up in something so important that he'd forgotten where he was supposed to be. Or maybe he hadn't forgotten at all. I swallowed against the lump in my throat, my mind spinning with thoughts I didn't want to entertain. David had been distant for months, distracted, preoccupied. I had chalked it up to work stress, to the weight of impending fatherhood pressing on his shoulders. But now, lying here alone in this bed, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that there was something else. My phone sat on the bedside table, screen dark, silent. No missed calls, no messages. I reached for it with trembling fingers, pressing the home button, half expecting a notification from him. A text, a call, anything. But there was nothing. Just an empty screen, the time glowing back at me like a cruel reminder of how long I had been waiting. Another contraction came, harder than the last. My body tensed, my breath hitching as I fought against the pain. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to cry. Not now. Not when I needed every ounce of strength I had. "You're doing great, Riley," Marla said, adjusting the monitor strapped around my belly. "You're strong. Just a little longer, okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't sure if I believed her. The truth was, I felt anything but strong. I felt abandoned, unwanted, like I was going through the most terrifying, life-altering experience of my life, and the one person who was supposed to be here had left me to face it. Alone. Another hour passed, then another. Nurses came and went. The doctor checked in. My contractions grew closer together, more intense. Sweat slicked my forehead, my hands, my back. My body trembled with exhaustion, and still, no sign of David. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in on me, suffocating. I clenched my jaw, forcing back the emotions threatening to choke me. I wouldn't let them break me. Not now. Marla glanced at me, hesitant. Riley, is there someone else you'd like to call? A family member? A friend? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Who would I call? My mother was gone. My father and I barely spoke. My friends. Most of them were also David's friends, and I wasn't ready to deal with their concerned voices, their inevitable questions. No, I had no one. Just myself. The reality of that hit me harder than any contraction. I had spent so much of my life believing in the fairy tale, in the idea that love meant never being alone, that marriage was a partnership, a team, that David and I were inseparable. But now, lying here, I realized something I had been too blind to see before. I had already been alone for a long time. I just hadn't noticed. I took a shaky breath, tightening my grip on the hospital sheets as another contraction tore through me. The pain was unbearable, but it wasn't the worst thing I was feeling. The worst thing was knowing, with absolute certainty, that when this was over, when my child was in my arms and the pain had faded, David's absence would still be there, and I would never forget it. I turned my head to the clock on the wall. Almost midnight. Hours since I had last heard from him. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, I stopped making excuses for him. David wasn't coming. He had made his choice, and as the next contraction hit, I made mine. I didn't need him. I would do this without him. I would raise this baby on my own. And if he thought I would forgive him for this, if he thought he could come waltzing back into my life like nothing had happened, he was dead wrong. The pain was relentless now, a constant, unyielding force gripping my body with every passing contraction. But even through the haze of exhaustion and agony, my mind remained sharp, fueled by something far more potent than physical discomfort. Betrayal. A nurse had just checked on me, her voice gentle, her hands warm as she reassured me that everything was progressing well. But I barely registered her words. My thoughts were elsewhere, fixated on the man who should have been by my side, but had chosen to be anywhere but here. I reached for my phone again, my fingers trembling, not from labor, but from something colder, heavier. Instinct? Fear? The growing suspicion that the man I had built my life around wasn't the person I thought he was. My thumb hovered over the screen, and before I could talk myself out of it, I tapped on the tracking app we had installed months ago. A simple precaution, we had called it. Something to check on each other's safety, not to monitor movements. But now, as the loading circle spun on my screen, I realized just how little I had ever needed to check it before tonight. The map appeared, and my stomach twisted. David wasn't stuck in traffic. He wasn't at work. He wasn't rushing through the hospital doors, breathless, apologetic, desperate to be by my side. He was at a hotel, a 5-star hotel across town. I stared at the blinking dot on my screen, willing it to be wrong, willing it to shift, to move, to suddenly appear at the hospital, proving me wrong. But it didn't. It just sat there, pulsing in mockery, screaming the truth I had refused to see for so long. The room seemed to tilt, the fluorescent lights above me humming with an eerie indifference. My breath came in shallow, uneven bursts, my heart pounding against my ribs like a war drum. Every excuse I had made for him, every doubt I had swallowed, every blind justification I had clung to, it all shattered in an instant. A sharp pain tore through me, forcing a strangled gasp from my lips. The nurse rushed back to my side, misinterpreting my distress. "Breathe, Riley," she said, pressing a cool cloth to my forehead. "You're almost there. Almost there. Almost at the finish line of this life I had thought was real. Almost, at the moment, where everything I had believed in crumbled beneath me." I clenched my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. David wasn't here because he had made a choice. A deliberate, conscious choice. While I was lying in this bed, bringing his child into the world, he was somewhere else. Somewhere he had no business being. And suddenly, the pain of labor wasn't the worst thing I was feeling anymore. The worst thing was knowing that this wasn't just neglect. It wasn't an oversight, an unfortunate timing, or even cowardice. It was betrayal. And I wasn't going to let it go unanswered. Betrayal doesn't come all at once. It creeps in, slowly at first, whispering in the back of your mind, nudging at your ribs, waiting for you to acknowledge its presence. But when you do, when you finally turn and face it, it doesn't whisper anymore. It roars. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly it was a wonder the screen didn't crack under this pressure. The small blinking dot on the GPS app taunted me, flashing his location over and over again, as if to make sure I really understood what was happening. David wasn't just absent. He had chosen to be absent. And worse, he wasn't alone. The realization hit harder than any contraction ever could. The hospital room, once merely cold and sterile, now felt suffocating. The walls were closing in, pressing against me, trapping me in this moment I could neither escape nor undo. I had thought labor would be the hardest part of this night. I had been wrong. A sharp, searing pain twisted through my body, forcing a cry from my lips. The nurse was by my side in an instant, her voice calm, her hands steady. "You're doing great, Riley. Just keep breathing. You're almost there." Almost where? Because wherever there was, it sure as hell wasn't where I thought I'd be. I had pictured this night 1,000 times. David would be here, holding my hand, whispering words of encouragement. He would kiss my forehead, his eyes filled with awe as he saw our child for the first time. He would cry. I would cry. It would be one of those perfect, untouchable moments in time. One that we would replay for years, telling our child how they came into the world surrounded by love. But love had no place in this room tonight. Only lies. I could almost hear his voice in my head, the excuses he would surely give if I confronted him. I got caught up at work. I wanted to be there, I swear. It's not what you think. Except, it was exactly what I thought. The evidence was right in front of me, staring back from my screen. He wasn't sitting in traffic, pounding the steering wheel in frustration, desperate to get to me. He wasn't at work, buried under last-minute deadlines. No. He was in a luxury hotel, indulging in whatever betrayal he had been carefully concealing for God knows how long. Another contraction crashed over me, more brutal than the last. I gasped, clutching the sheets, trying to anchor myself against the tidal wave of pain. But the physical agony was nothing compared to the weight pressing against my chest, suffocating me from the inside out. The nurse held my hand, her fingers warm and reassuring. "Just a little longer," she said. A little longer. Those words echoed in my head, but not in the way she meant them. How long had this been going on? How many nights had he kissed me goodbye, telling me he was working late, only to end up wrapped around someone else? How many lies had I swallowed, unknowingly feeding the very deception that had now torn my world apart? I wanted to scream. Not from labor, not from pain, from rage, from the sheer bone-deep fury of realizing that the life I had built was nothing more than an illusion. But I didn't scream. Instead, I closed my eyes, forcing my breathing to steady. I could break down later. I could fall apart later. Right now, I had a job to do. I had a child to bring into this world. And I would be damned if David's betrayal would steal this moment from me. Tears burned in the corners of my eyes. But I blinked them away. He didn't deserve my tears. He didn't deserve the power to ruin this for me. I would remember this moment, but not because of him. I would remember it because it was the moment I stopped being blind. Because from this moment forward, everything would change. Pain used to be something I feared. The kind that grips your muscles, wrings your body like a rag, leaves you breathless, desperate for relief. But that was before. Before I learned that physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of betrayal. Before I lay in this hospital bed, bringing my child into the world alone, while the man who had sworn to love me was in a hotel bed with someone else. A fresh contraction ripped through me, searing and unrelenting, but I barely reacted. I had passed the point of crying out, of writhing, of needing comfort. The nurses had stopped asking if I wanted to call someone. They had stopped offering words of reassurance, as if they could sense that I wasn't like the other women who labored with whispers of encouragement from their husbands. No, I was different. I was alone, and yet I was stronger for it. The room felt colder than before, the fluorescent lights overhead casting a harsh glow over the sterile walls. I could hear the soft murmurs of nurses, the occasional beeping of machines, but all of it was distant, background noise to the storm that raged inside me. I clenched the bedsheets as another contraction gripped me, but I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. The pain was temporary. The betrayal? That was permanent. I focused on my breathing, forcing my body to obey. Each inhale felt like steel being forged in fire, each exhale sharpening the edges of my mind. I wasn't weak. I wasn't broken. I was becoming something else entirely. Something colder, harder, unshakable. And the only thing stronger than the pain coursing through my body was the fury simmering beneath my skin. David had made a choice. And now I would make mine. I didn't let myself dwell on the specifics, not yet. Revenge wasn't an impulse, a momentary lapse of control. It was calculated, precise. And I would execute it with the same patience and care that I had once given to our marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very loyalty I had shown him would now become my weapon. A sharp cry pulled me from my thoughts, piercing through the tension like a blade slicing through silk. For a moment, the world stilled. The storm inside me paused, giving way to something raw and unfiltered. My baby. The weight of the moment pressed down on me as I turned my head, my chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. The nurse held him gently, her voice soft, but I barely registered her words. I reached out with trembling fingers, and the second my skin met his tiny, warm body, everything shifted. He was perfect. His delicate features, the way his tiny fingers curled instinctively against my chest. He was innocent in all of this, a product of love that had turned to ruin. And I would never let him feel an ounce of the pain I was feeling now. I swallowed hard, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of his head. His warmth seeped into my skin, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. But it didn't change anything. The moment of tenderness passed as quickly as it came, dissolving into the same quiet rage that had carried me through the past few hours. David should have been here. He should have been the first to hold his son, to whisper to him, to promise him a lifetime of love and protection. But he had chosen to be somewhere else, and he would regret it. I wouldn't let this moment break me. I wouldn't let his absence taint this experience. No, I would use it. I would let it fuel me. I glanced down at my son, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. He was mine, and I would make sure he never needed David. I would raise him on my own, without lies, without deception, without the false security of a father who had already proven he couldn't be trusted. A slow exhale left my lips, controlled, measured. I wouldn't cry over David. I wouldn't waste another second mourning a man who had never truly been mine. I had something far more important to focus on now, and when the time was right, when every piece was in place, when he least expected it, David would learn what it meant to betray a woman who had nothing left to lose. There's something eerie about the way betrayal changes you. It doesn't just break you, it sharpens you. It strips away every soft edge, every naive belief, every ounce of trust you once had, and leaves something else behind. Something colder. Something calculating. I wasn't the woman I had been before that night. The woman who had still believed in love. The woman who had still held on to hope. Even as she lay in a hospital bed, bringing a child into the world alone. That version of me had died the moment I saw the GPS notification blinking on my phone. The woman I was now, she didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She planned. And she would make sure David regretted every lie, every touch, every stolen moment he had given to someone else. But revenge wasn't something you executed in haste. It wasn't. Screaming in his face the moment he walked through the door, demanding answers he would only twist into manipulative excuses. No, that wasn't how this would play out. I had been blind before, but now I saw everything. And I would make sure that when I made my move, there would be no way out for him. I would burn his world to the ground. The night I left the hospital, I didn't go home to rest. I didn't collapse into bed, exhausted from labor and heartbreak. Instead, I sat in the dark, my newborn son sleeping soundly in his crib, while I stared at my laptop screen, replaying the past in my mind. David had been sloppy, arrogant. He had thought himself untouchable. And that was his first mistake. I opened our shared bank account and scrolled through the transactions with new eyes. The clues had always been there, buried under mundane purchases, hotel charges disguised as business trips, expensive dinners at restaurants I had never been invited to, transactions that had seemed insignificant before, but now glowed like neon signs. He had been spending money on her. That realization should have hurt, should have made me sob into my hands. But all I felt was cold determination. I grabbed a notebook, and for the first time, I started documenting everything. Bank statements were just the beginning. I needed timestamps, locations, a story so bulletproof that when I confronted him, there would be no room for lies. David had always been reckless with his phone. He trusted that I wouldn't snoop, that I wouldn't dare invade his privacy. How wrong he had been. A simple retrieval of his call logs showed the same repeating number again and again. Not work, not family, personal, private. I copied the number into a search bar, my hand steady. A name popped up. She had a face now. A workplace. Social media accounts. A life that had intertwined with mine without me ever knowing. She was younger than me? Prettier? Maybe. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she thought she had won. She thought she had taken something from me. But the truth was, I had already let him go. Now, I was just making sure he paid the price. David had grown comfortable. Too comfortable. He had stopped covering his tracks. I dug deeper, scouring his emails, his text messages, his cloud storage. And what I found? Hotel reservations under his name, flight tickets. Explicit messages exchanged at hours when I had been asleep in our bed, believing he was next to me, faithful. And yet, here it all was. Evidence that he had never even tried to hide, believing I would never look for it. I gathered it all. Screenshots, downloads, forwarded messages sent to a secure email address I had created just for this purpose. This wasn't just about confronting him. This was about control. Because when the time came, I wouldn't just expose him. I would make sure he had nowhere left to turn. Over the next few weeks, I played my role flawlessly. David came home as if nothing had happened, kissing me on the forehead, cooing over our baby, spinning his lies with practiced ease. and I let him. I smiled at the right moments. I nodded at his stories. I let him believe that I was still the woman who had once trusted him blindly. But I was watching. I was documenting. Every late-night meeting. Every mysterious phone call. Every new lie that dripped from his mouth. And with each passing day, the noose tightened around his neck. I wasn't just preparing to leave him. I was preparing to destroy him. I knew there was one last thing I needed before I was ready. A confession. But not just any confession. One I could use. So I waited. I played my part. And then, one night, as he sat across from me at dinner, his phone buzzed. I saw the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the way his fingers tensed around the device. He thought I didn't notice. But I did. And so I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand, and smiled sweetly. "Who's texting you so late?" I asked, my voice light. Curious. David blinked. "Just work." I tilted my head. "At 10 o'clock at night?" He hesitated. A split second. But that was all I needed. I reached for his phone, laughing as if it were a joke, as if I were teasing him like I used to. He pulled it away too fast, and in that moment, I saw the truth written all over his face. I let my expression falter. Just a little. Just enough. "David," I whispered, my voice small. "Tell me the truth." And that's when he cracked. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face, pretending to be exhausted, as if the weight of his lies had finally become too much. "Riley, look, things haven't been great between us. And I made a mistake. A mistake." That's what he called it. Not months of deception. Not nights spent in another woman's bed. Not abandoning me in a hospital while I gave birth to his child. A mistake. I nodded slowly, as if absorbing his words. But inside, I was already seeing the endgame. I had everything I needed now. His confessions, his records, his patterns. And soon, I would make sure that every single person in his life knew exactly who he was. But not yet. Because revenge wasn't just about the strike. It was about the waiting. The anticipation. The moment when he would realize, far too late, that he had never been the predator. He had always been the prey. Revenge is not loud. It is not screaming in the middle of an argument or throwing a drink in someone's face during a heated moment. No, that kind of reaction is for the weak, for those who let their emotions dictate their actions. True revenge is quiet. It is patient. It is a slow, deliberate process, a game of precision rather than passion. It is the kind of justice that takes time to perfect, ensuring that when the final blow lands, there is no escape, and I was prepared to deliver it. David still believed he was in control. Even after that half-hearted confession, after the guilt-ridden sighs and weak excuses, he still thought he had options. He thought he could manipulate the truth, twist reality in his favor, and somehow convince me that what he had done wasn't as bad as it seemed. He was wrong. Because while he was busy underestimating me, I had been preparing. I had been gathering every shred of evidence, every lie, every transaction, every betrayal, and stacking them neatly into a case so airtight that when the time came, he wouldn't just lose me, he would lose everything. The first step in dismantling a man like David is making sure the legal system is on your side. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a shark. Someone who didn't just play by the rules but knew how to bend them when necessary. Someone who wouldn't just win a case but would make sure it was a bloodbath. I found her on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after leaving the hospital. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and she had a reputation that sent shivers down the spines of cheating husbands and dishonest businessmen alike. She specialized in high conflict divorces, the kind where men walked in believing they'd come out with half and left with nothing but their last name. I sat across from her in her sleek office, my son sleeping in his carrier beside me, while she flipped through the thick folder of evidence I had compiled. I had never been more prepared for anything in my life. When she finished reading, she looked up at me with an expression I hadn't expected, something close to admiration. "You did your homework," she said, leaning back in her chair. "This is extensive." I nodded. "I don't want to fight. I want to win." She smirked, tapping her manicured nails against the desk. "You already have." A divorce wasn't just about signing papers. It was about leverage. And I had plenty of it. David had not only abandoned me at the hospital, but he had also been financially reckless, using our joint accounts to fund his affair. That alone gave me a case for marital misconduct, a legal argument that would ensure I walked away with the upper hand. But I wasn't just aiming for financial gain. I wanted sole custody of my son. I wanted David to be stripped of every right he thought he had. Evelyn laid it out in simple terms. You have 3 major advantages. 1, you have documented proof of infidelity. That weakens any case he could make for an equal division of assets. 2, you have financial records showing misuse of marital funds, which strengthens your argument for full control over joint property. And 3, she gestured toward my sleeping baby, you gave birth alone. A judge won't take kindly to that. I already knew all of this, but hearing it from a professional solidified everything. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was playing my cards exactly as I should. And David? He didn't even know he was sitting at a table where I had already stacked the deck against him. The best way to blindside a man like David is to let him believe he's safe. So I waited. I let him come home each night, acting as if nothing had changed. I let him hold our son, let him kiss my cheek, let him tell me about his day as if I cared. I let him believe I was still the same woman he had once deceived. But behind closed doors, I was orchestrating his downfall. The divorce papers were drawn up with meticulous care, ensuring every detail was in my favor. The custody request was filed, citing abandonment and emotional negligence. And the financial records were laid out so clearly that no judge could overlook them. When everything was ready, I handed it all to Evelyn. And then, I waited for the detonation. It happened on a Tuesday evening. David walked through the door, loosening his tie, smiling as if he still had the right to. He placed his briefcase on the counter and leaned in to kiss my forehead, and that was when the doorbell rang. I stepped back, my heart steady, my expression unreadable as he frowned and moved to answer it. The second he saw the man standing there, the court official with an envelope in hand, I watched his entire world shift. Confusion, then realization, and finally, panic. I didn't say a word as he took the papers, flipping through them with shaking hands. His head snapped up, eyes wild. "Riley, what the hell is this?" I tilted my head. "You tell me, David." His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but no words came out. He scanned the documents, his fingers gripping the edges so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Divorce?" he finally choked out. "Full custody?" I nodded, calm. "Yes." He shook his head, stepping toward me, his voice rising. "You can't be serious. Riley, come on, we can talk about this." "No, David," I interrupted, my voice sharp, unwavering. "We can't." His eyes darted to the baby, who was blissfully unaware of the chaos unfolding. "You can't take my son away from me." His voice cracked, but I felt nothing. I raised a brow. "You mean the son you abandoned while he was being born? The son you ignored while you were too busy playing house with someone else?" His mouth pressed into a tight line, but he had no response. Because there was no defense. No excuse that could erase the facts I had laid out before him. I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping just enough to make sure he felt every syllable. You lost us the moment you chose her over me. The silence that followed was suffocating. He looked back at the papers, at the reality sinking in. There was no way out. I had made sure of that. David had underestimated me. And now, he was paying the price. That night, David left. He didn't have a choice. The court order ensured he couldn't stay in the house. His accounts were frozen, his assets locked in pending division, and his reputation, well, that would be the next thing to crumble. Because I wasn't done yet. I didn't just want him out of my life. I wanted everyone to see him for who he really was. And the next phase of my plan? It would ensure that his lies, his betrayals, and his downfall became public knowledge. But that was for another day. For now, I stood in the quiet of my home, my son sleeping peacefully in my arms. I had won. And I was just getting started. There's something satisfying about watching a liar unravel. It's not just the moment they realize they've lost. It's the slow, agonizing descent. The way their confidence cracks. The way their lies start to contradict each other. The way the world around them starts to shift. It's a kind of justice that no courtroom can provide. And I wanted justice. Legal action was only the first phase. The papers had been served, the divorce was in motion, and David had been forced to leave the house he once called home. But this wasn't just about ending our marriage. That was too easy. This was about exposing him. David had spent years crafting a persona, an image of a devoted husband, a successful businessman, a man of integrity. He had convinced his family, his friends, his colleagues, even me, that he was someone worth admiring. That illusion was about to shatter. Revenge is best served when no one sees it coming. And what better way to destroy a man than in front of the very people he seeks validation from? David had always been obsessed with appearances. He thrived on admiration, on being the center of attention. So when I sent out the invitations, I made sure it was an event he wouldn't ignore, a celebration for our newborn. A gathering of family, friends, and colleagues. A moment to introduce our child to the world. Of course, David assumed I was playing nice. That despite everything, I was still the kind, forgiving woman he had married. He had no idea that this wasn't just a party. It was an execution. The house was filled with people, all congratulating me, admiring the baby, oblivious to the storm that was about to unfold. I smiled. I laughed. I played the perfect host. And David? He walked in, dressed in his best suit, wearing that smug, confident smile he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. He had no idea. He had no idea that in the next few minutes, his entire world was about to collapse. I waited until the room was full, until all eyes were on me. Then, with a calmness that almost felt unnatural, I cleared my throat. Before we continue, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This moment is special, and I couldn't imagine celebrating it without you all. The guests smiled, some raising their glasses. David stood beside me, playing the role of the proud father, unaware of the dagger hovering above his head. I turned to him, meeting his eyes, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in his expression. Unease. Good. David, I continued, my voice sweet. Would you like to say a few words? He hesitated, but pride won over hesitation. He straightened his tie, smiled at the crowd, and stepped forward. Of course, he said, clearing his throat. I just want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate our beautiful son. Riley has been incredible, and I held up my hand. Actually, before you continue, I'd like to share something first. I picked up the remote to the TV screen mounted on the wall. The same TV David had watched countless games on. The same TV he had sat in front of while pretending to be the perfect husband. The screen lit up, and the first image appeared. A hotel reservation. Then another, and another. A string of transactions, emails, text messages, all linking David to his affair. All displaying, in front of everyone, just how deep his betrayal ran. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs. Whispers. David froze. His face drained of color. And then, the final image appeared. A picture of him, taken just 2 weeks ago, checking into the very same hotel he had been caught in before. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a pattern. I turned to him, my expression unreadable. "Would you like to say a few words now?" Silence. The room pulsed with tension. His mother covered her mouth in shock. His father's face twisted in disgust. His colleagues exchanged glances, already realizing what this meant for his reputation. David opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I tilted my head. "Nothing? No explanation?" He finally managed to find his voice. "Riley, let's talk about this privately." I laughed, a soft, almost pitying laugh. "Oh no. See, you never gave me the courtesy of privacy when you made me go through labor alone while you were with her." The weight of my words hit him like a slap. His world, his perfect, carefully curated world, was crumbling. And I was standing in the center of it all, untouched, untouchable. David left that night with nothing but shame. His family refused to speak to him. His colleagues, the same ones who had once respected him, whispered behind his back. But the best part? The woman he had risked everything for? She dumped him the next day. Because nothing is less attractive than a man who has lost everything. And David? David had nothing. I made sure of it. Revenge, when done right, is not just about exposing someone. It's not about a single moment of humiliation or a fleeting sense of victory. No, true revenge is about dismantling a person piece by piece, making them watch as everything they valued, everything they built, crumbles right in front of them. And that was exactly what I intended to do to David, destroying his reputation. In front of family, friends, and colleagues was just the beginning. That night, when he walked out of my house in disgrace, it was only his first taste of what was coming. He had no home to return to, no support system to lean on. And I wasn't finished yet. David had always prided himself on being financially savvy, the kind of man who could turn any deal in his favor. He handled our finances, believing he was in control of everything. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated me. While he was busy sneaking around, I was busy gathering every financial document, every bank statement, every business contract with his name on it. I had spent months preparing for this moment, ensuring that when I made my move, it would be irreversible. First, I froze every joint account. He woke up the morning after the party to find his credit cards declined, his access to our savings revoked, his financial lifeline severed. He called me 4 times, 5 times, but I didn't answer. Then, I reached out to his employer. See, David wasn't just a cheating husband. He was also a businessman who had been using company funds for personal expenses. A few dinners, a couple of hotel stays, all conveniently expensed under business meetings. I had proof of it all. And I sent it directly to the board of directors. It didn't take long for them to act. By the end of the week, David was called into a meeting where they presented everything, every fraudulent charge, every misused company resource, every violation of their financial policies. He walked out of that office unemployed, his career, his pride, his identity, all gone in an instant. But financial destruction wasn't enough. David needed to feel the weight of his choices in every aspect of his life. His parents, once his biggest supporters, cut him off completely. His mother, who had adored me, refused to even take his calls. His father, a man of strict principles, told him he had disgraced the family name. His friends? Most of them had wives and girlfriends who now refused to associate with him. The same. Men who had once cheered him on in secret were now distancing themselves, afraid of being labeled guilty by association. And the woman he had risked it all for? She left him too, because nothing is less attractive than a man who has lost everything. But the real masterpiece, the final nail in his coffin, was the legal battle. David had assumed that, at worst, he'd have to pay some alimony, maybe share custody. But Evelyn, my lawyer, was ruthless. We filed for full custody. We presented his abandonment of our child at birth. We laid out his financial irresponsibility, his lack of emotional presence, his history of dishonesty. And when the judge saw the mountain of evidence against him, there was no debate. I was granted full custody. David, once so sure of his place as a father, was reduced to a visitor, a man with no legal rights, no say in our child's future. I made sure that he would never again hold power over me, and as I walked out of that courtroom, my son in my arms, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The best part of revenge isn't the destruction itself. It's watching the moment they realize they have nothing left. David tried to reach me. He sent messages, emails, even had mutual acquaintances try to talk to me on his behalf. But I never responded, because he no longer existed in my world. I had built a new life, one free of lies, one where I was the only one in control. And David? David was just a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you betray someone who has nothing left to lose. There comes a moment in every person's life where they have to choose. Choose to let go, choose to move forward, or choose to stay anchored in the past, letting the weight of what happened hold them down. I had chosen to move forward. I had chosen to leave David behind, to let go of the woman I had been, and to embrace the woman I was becoming, stronger, wiser, and free. When you've been hurt as deeply as I had been, it's easy to lose yourself in the anger, in the betrayal, in the desire for vengeance. It's easy to let that fury consume you, to let it become the very thing that defines you. But I learned something important in those months of planning, executing, and watching David fall. Revenge may give you a taste of justice, but it is not the cure. What I needed wasn't more destruction. What I needed was healing. And so, I let go. It's funny how much life changes when you stop being defined by someone else's actions. For so long, I had lived in the shadow of David's lies. I had allowed myself to believe that my worth was tied to his approval, to his love, to the life we had built together. But now I was learning what it meant to build a life on my own terms. Every morning, I woke up to the quiet sounds of my son breathing softly beside me. Every moment spent with him was a reminder that my value was never tied to David's betrayal. I was his mother, and that was enough. The mornings were slow. They were peaceful. I spent my days with my son, watching him grow, learning his little quirks, his beautiful laugh. Every milestone, every giggle, every first word was a victory in itself. My focus shifted from revenge to rebuilding, from destruction to creation. And as the months passed, I realized that the man I had been before, broken, vulnerable, clinging to a past that had shattered, no longer existed. I had forged a new version of myself, one who was unbreakable, one who could walk through fire and come out the other side without a single scar. They say the hardest person to forgive is yourself. And for a long time, I believed that. I believed that my inability to see the truth, my failure to confront the cracks in our marriage, was something I had to live with. I carried that guilt like a weight around my neck, convinced that I had been weak, that I had allowed David's lies to take root in my heart. But as I sat in the quiet of my home one evening, watching my son play with his toys, I realized that forgiveness didn't mean excusing the past. It meant accepting it. It meant understanding that I couldn't change the things I had missed, or the mistakes I had made. What mattered was that I had chosen to move forward, to make a better life for myself and my son, and that in itself was a form of strength. I let go of the guilt. I let go of the shame. And in doing so, I allowed myself to breathe again. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I got a call. It was from a lawyer. David had filed a motion for visitation rights. He was trying to re-enter my life, to weasel his way back in under, the guise of wanting to be part of our son's life. At first, I was tempted. I was tempted to engage, to confront him, to tell him that I had won, that he was nothing, that he had lost everything because of his own choices. But I didn't. Instead, I called Evelyn, my lawyer, and had the motion shot down. There was no place for him in our lives anymore. No place for someone who had shown his true colors, who had discarded his family for selfish desires. David didn't fight it. He didn't try to appeal or send another lawyer. He simply walked away, and I never heard from him again. It's strange how quickly life can change when you make the decision to take control. The house that once felt like a prison was now a sanctuary. The quiet, the peace, the absence of David's presence was the freedom I had fought so hard for. As I watched my son grow, I saw his eyes light up with curiosity, with wonder. He didn't know the pain I had gone through to get to this point. He didn't know the battles I had fought in silence. All he knew was that he had a mother who would fight for him, protect him, and love him with every ounce of her being. And that, I realized, was all I ever needed. The future wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about retribution or the desire to make David suffer. It was about moving forward, about building a life that was mine and mine alone. I had no more space in my heart for anger, no more energy to waste on someone who had no regard for me or my son. What I had now was a blank canvas, one I was ready to paint with the colors of a life well lived. I started volunteering at local charities, using my experiences to help others who were going through what I had. I began to build friendships with people who supported me, who saw me for who I was, not the broken woman I had once been, but a strong, resilient mother who had learned to thrive despite everything. And in the evenings, after my son had gone to bed, I would sit quietly, reflecting on everything that had led me here. I had faced the worst of it. I had lived through the darkest days. But now, the future was mine to create. I had found closure, and with it, I had found freedom. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is not in making someone else pay. It's in reclaiming yourself. It's in taking back the power you once gave away and using it to build something better. I had done that. I had taken my life back. And with each passing day, I knew that my son and I were building a future free of lies, free of betrayal, and free of the man who had tried to destroy us. I was finally free. And that freedom, in all its quiet glory, was the most beautiful thing I had ever known.